I didn't make it to our first GBM because we had it on a Wednesday and I have class and stuff, but it's nice to meet all of you guys. And so today what we're going to be doing is a tutorial on how to use like a web API. So basically like we're going to be making like a website where you can type in like key terms into a search bar, and it's going to search basically on the iTunes store for songs, artists, albums that sort of fit those key terms. So what's unique about that, or what's cool about that, is not necessarily just using it for iTunes, but essentially like anything that you want to like use that is able to get information from like other places in the internet, you'll do something similar to this. So like an application where you just sort of store everything in a file is not really like incredibly useful, because then it's just information that you have locally. But if you can make an application that can like get data from the internet and then bring it back in your application, and then you work with that data in your application, there's basically, I mean, that's like a lot of things you can do in software development with that. So as we're going through this, don't necessarily think of it as just like, oh, I can get songs from iTunes. It's like there's basically tons of just like web APIs, like any apps that you use on your phone are probably hitting web APIs to get the data that they need, and then they display it in a certain way on your phone. And like this web app that we're making is making a request to potentially those same APIs, getting the data back and then displaying it in HTML. So this is just like one of the ways that you can interact with those APIs to get that data and then display it to the user and have them interact with it and stuff like that. So that being said, we're going to be starting with a skeleton, so we don't have to do everything from scratch, which it's basically just the HTML is there and no JavaScript code yet. So if you go to our website, ufsec.com, you see here download our GBM number 2 skeleton here. So if you click that link, you should be able to download this zip file. I'm just going to save it on the desktop. Go ahead and extract that. And then I'm going to open that whole directory in Atom. So whatever text editor you're using, I recommend, instead of opening just specific files, if you're able to open that entire directory, that way you can see all the files that are in that directory. I'll make this bigger too before we actually get started. So I'll do file open. And make sure you're opening the extracted folder and not the zip folder itself, because you might have issues with it if you do that. All right, let me make this full screen. Zoom in a little bit. All right, cool. So I'll give everyone a second to get that downloaded, and in the meantime, I'll show you what's actually in the skeleton. So there's actually not a lot. So you see we have this script.js, which actually has nothing in it. So that's where we're going to be putting all of our JavaScript code that actually makes a request to that API, and then like takes that data, parses through it, and then displays it to the user. And what we have here is how many of you have written like HTML, CSS, JavaScript, any of that stuff before? Okay, so kind of, sort of a few people. So I'll just very briefly, so this isn't like an HTML tutorial, so I'm not going to go in depth in super detail about it. But basically, what we have here is, including Bootstrap, which is just a nice, easy way of making things look pretty. Including Jquery, which Jquery is a library that allows you to like interact with things that are like on your website and like interact with the DOM and things like that. If you don't know specific words I'm saying, that's all right. Don't worry about it too much. And then here we're including the custom script.js, where we're going to put all of our code. So basically the code that we write is going to be running in our browser. Actually, what might be even more helpful is if I open this in the browser so you can see what it looks like while I'm going through the code. So if you, let me move this over. So if you open up this folder, wherever you saved save the skeleton, and if you double click on that index.html file, it should just automatically open it in your browser. But basically this is what we have so far. So iTunes search, use the search box below to search the iTunes store, and we have search results with all this information here. Now right now if I search for, say, the Beatles, nothing's going to happen because we haven't written any code yet, right? This, like, everything that's right here is just like how it looks. And I'll take you through just real quick, just so it doesn't look like magic to you. So right here we have the header here. So you can see there's a header here, iTunes search, which is this here, and then this little description here. Use the search box below to search the iTunes store. We have the actual search bar here, which you can see is right here. And note we've given an identifier to the button and to the actual input. So we'll be using those later to actually be able to interact with those in code using Jquery. And then you see here we have our search results, which we have this little panel here. You can see it says search results, and then we have a table here. We also gave the table an ID, so we're going to be interacting with that table later to actually put our search results. And right here, TR, that stands for table row. So we have one row in our table with these essentially header elements for artist, album, track, all that stuff. So is everybody okay with that so far? Any questions? Cool. So let's go to our script.js. And so the first thing that we're going to do is be able to know when the user clicks a button. Because without being able to interact with or like pick up those types of events, the website is not really going to do anything. So with Jquery, there's something that you can do where, since we included this script in the header in HTML, we need to make sure that all the actual contents, like if you want to add a click listener to a button, which is what we're going to do, we need to make sure that that button's actually been loaded in the browser already, or else we're not going to be able to find it. So we can type here. Do you need me to make this a little bit bigger? Yeah. Probably. How's that?
Yeah.
So we want to wait for the document to be ready. So we will do document.ready. And put in a little anonymous function there. So basically, once the document's ready, this code in here is going to be ran. So what we'll want to do is, here, so for now, I'll split this up and down. You don't have to do this, but I'm just going to show you so you can see this. We don't need this right now. So you saw our search button had an ID of search-btn. So what we'll want to do is using Jquery. So I recommend if you're not fully comfortable with the way the Jquery syntax looks and stuff like that, just Google Jquery and you can read through the documentation. By doing that, you'll get a lot more out of it than if I were to try to explain every little minute thing about Jquery. But essentially, you can use it to query and find things that are in your HTML and then interact with it. So yeah, that's basically just a high-level understanding of how it works. So we want to find our search button, and then whenever you click that button, we're going to have this function run. And for now, let's just log to the console. I was clicked. Okay. So if you have this open right now, you can refresh the page. What I recommend doing is if you have a Mac, Command-R or Command-Shift-R. If you have a Windows, I think it's something similar to that. But basically, you want to refresh it and clear the cache because it might be caching an older version of whatever files that you have. And then there's something else that we'll do. So this is just a very useful tool whenever you're doing anything with web development. Is if you're using Chrome, and most of the other browsers have it too, but you can open a developer or debugger window so you can sort of see things that you're writing out to the console. So on a Windows computer, if you hit F12, it should open that up. On a Mac, hit Command Options J. And we'll go ahead and slide this up. So there's a lot of really useful things in here. Like you can see requests being made, you can see the elements on the page. But for now, we're interested in looking at the console. And when we click Go, you see I was clicked. So now we're not really doing anything super interesting, but we know when the button was clicked. So is anybody having trouble? Did anybody not have this come up when they click the button? Awesome. All right, so the next thing that we want to do is be able to figure out what, so if you type into the search bar, we want to know what's in there so we can use that in our request, right? So the way that we'll do that is we're going to use Jquery also. So we can go ahead and remove this, and let's see. So we have an input here called search input. So get the search term. So we'll create a variable called, let's call that search term. And we're going to try to find that element. So same kind of thing, and we'll do search dash input. And to get the value that is there, we'll do .val. And now this time, let's try logging that. So it's kind of being cut off here. Let me move this over a little bit. So we're finding search input, we're taking the value of that, and then we are logging to the console search term. And make sure you spell things right, or else it's not going to work. Cool. So again, we have to refresh the page. I'm using Command R to do that, to clear the cache. And so if we do this now, it's saying undefined because there's no value. If we say, let's say, Gary Clark Jr., it's still undefined because I did something wrong. Let's see. Search input.
I think you forgot the hashtag in front of search input.
I did, thank you. Yeah, okay, so that's another thing about Jquery. So using that pound sign is a way that you query for an element based off of its ID. There's other types of querying, like you can query based off of a class name if you put a dot instead. You can query off of, I think just like types of tags. But for this, we want to make sure that we get that specific element. And typically, if you want to select like a bunch of things that have something in common, you would use classes. But if you want just like one specific thing, it's better to use an ID. So yeah. So let's refresh. Okay, good. Yeah. So it shouldn't be undefined. It's just an empty string right now. So yeah. And then if we search again for Gary Clark Jr., we see that being displayed in the console. So now we're pretty much ready to make a request with that information. So before we move on with that, so get ready to make request. So let's take a look at the documentation for the API that we're going to be using, because there's no way to automatically know what endpoint you want to hit or like what information they require from you. Like this isn't just something that you're automatically going to know. So if we look, I'm just going to look up. You don't have to do this, but just follow along. Or like if you're trying to use a different API, which I would encourage you to do after this tutorial, this is essentially how you would want to do it. So let's look up iTunes. Search API. think this is the right one. Okay, overview. So basically, okay, they're showing us that this is like the URL, itunes.apple.com/search, question mark, and then a question mark basically allows you to put parameters in your query. So like, let me go down and I'll show you some examples that they give. Let's see. Okay, yeah, so they give examples of some of the things you can do here. So you go /search question mark, and basically after that you would give key 1 equals value 1, and key 2 equals value 2, and key 3 equals value 3. So here's the different types of keys that we can give. So term, they're telling you, is a URL encoded string that you want to search for. So that's the one that we're going to be using. So we could potentially make it so that if we use one of these other ones, like attribute, we would be searching for different things, or version or explicit. We could include in our query whether or not we want to filter by explicit results. But for this, we're just going to use term, which means that we're going to be, what they're saying here is that it's just going to be looking for that text string in the results. And then we're also going to be using kind, which is somewhere here. Kind here. So kind is a type of content, so we want to make sure that we're only looking at songs. So I'm going to copy this part right here. So we want to make the request. So let's say, so we're going to start saying that the URL is equal to this. And let's call that base URL, because this is our URL without any of the parameters that we want to include in it. And what we want to do is add some parameters to that, so that we can search for the text that the user is giving us. So we'll create another variable for URL, and we'll say that that is equal to base URL plus. So just like the documentation said, you add a question mark, and then we're going to put our query parameters. So term equals search term, or sorry, plus search term. And then we also wanted to make sure that it's a song. So we'll do and kind equals song. So let's see, we don't really need that anymore. Okay, so we're starting with our base URL here, itunes.apple.com/search. We're going to be taking that base URL and adding to it some query parameters for term, equals search term, and kind equals song. So these are like the key values that we're providing to their endpoint. So then when we once we do that, we should get some kind of response back that contains the data that is relevant to this query that we're making. So right now we're ready to actually make a request with this URL, but we need to know how to do that first. So let's create another function here that's going to help us make that request. So we'll create a function, http get async. And I'll explain why we're using async in a little bit. So JavaScript has this XML Http request, which is what we'll be using to help us make this request. And then so what we want to add to it also is, so throughout the life cycle of the request that we make, basically, one thing you have to understand about it is if you've done like a lot of programming before but not network related, you're sort of able to call a function and then like whatever is returned from that function, you just get back right away, right? But if you're making a request to something that's like not on your computer and it's like on the internet, I mean, anything could happen with that request, right? Like you could send the request out, for all you know, maybe you're not even connected to the internet, so it's never going to come back. Or maybe the server that you're trying to hit is down for some reason and you don't get a response back. Or any number of things could happen. So the way that this is handled is we need to know, basically, we could handle errors in situations like that, but for now we just want to know, okay, when does this request come back, and has it come back successfully? So we're going to do XML Http dot on ready state change, which is basically when I mean, I feel like that name is kind of self-explanatory, when it changes state. This is a function, and we want to make sure that the state is one, basically meaning that it's done and that it's successful. So you could look up, here, after I type this, I want to show you guys something so you're not just taking my word for it. Okay, so basically what this is saying is if the response came back and it came back successfully, 200 is a successful response code. There's other, I'm sure you guys have seen 404 before, right? That's just another example of response code. 404 means that you weren't able to find it. There's 403s, which is like, I think that's like forbidden access. There's tons of different status codes, but 200 is the one that we want to look for. And you see we provided a callback here, so we're going to call that function, and you'll see that come into play later on. And then what you're going to want to do is open a request. So there are different types of HTTP requests that you can make. There's like get, post, put, a couple other ones. For just getting simple data back where you're not really modifying anything, get is what you're going to want to use. And we'll do it to the URL. And this flag true is just saying that we want to do it asynchronously rather than synchronously. So what that basically means is that if we were to do it synchronously, like I said before, where you're in your traditional non-network related programming, like you'll call a function and it will return back right away. Or if it takes a really long time for that function to run, everything's going to wait for that function to finish, and then it will return. But nothing else is happening in the meantime. Well, when you're using network-related requests where that could potentially take a long time, and also there's other things that need to be happening as well, you don't want to stop everything else from happening just while you wait for that request to come back. So if you're doing that on a website, or like imagine on a mobile app if you were to block everything when you made a request. Like you wouldn't be able to scroll through the app anymore. Like everything would appear as if it was frozen. And you don't want that to happen. So we're going to make this asynchronously, basically saying, go do this stuff in the background. And this callback here that we're providing, well, as soon as you're done, call this function and give me the response, rather than stopping everything else and waiting for the response to come back. Does that make sense? Because this is something that can be kind of confusing to understand at first. But I feel like if you think of it this way, it kind of makes sense. So then we'll do XML Http .send, and this could take in a request body, which we don't need one, so we'll just pass in null. So before we move on, let's look at this XML Http request. Yeah, so like all of these things here, you can, there's like great documentation for it that explains what it is. So this is an object to interact with servers. You can retrieve data from a URL without having to do a full page refresh, blah, blah, blah. You can see this on ready state change is called whenever the ready state attribute changes. Basically, you can see all this information here. I want to show you where you see the actual code. So ready state, let's see. Okay, here we go. So you saw earlier we were checking to see if ready state was 4. Well, here you can see 4 means that it's done. And then, yeah, so all this stuff is documented. You don't ever have to just memorize all of this. Yeah, so we're going to be making a request here. So, okay, so just by making this function, though, we're not actually using it yet. We just basically made that available to call somewhere else in our code. So let's go ahead and call that here. So we'll make the request. So that's where we will do HTTP Get Async. The first parameter was the URL, so let's pass in the URL. And then it took in a callback. So remember, this is the function that's going to be called once the response comes back from the server. And you saw here that we were passing it the response text. So we'll create a function here that takes in a response. And let's see, what do we want to do here? For now, let's just log the response and see what it looks like. And here, it's always good to like add comments. So helper function to make a get request. Say async get request. Okay, so once this is ready, we're going to add this click listener. And keep in mind that like this code here does not get executed right away. It's basically creating something that listens for when you click on this, and then it's going to get executed. So we're going to get the search term from that input. We don't need to log that anymore. We're setting up the URL that we're going to make the request to. We're making the request, and we're going to be logging the response. So let's see what happens. I'm going to refresh the page. Let's search for. All right, someone name an artist that you like a lot. Anyone? Nobody listens to music?
Black Bear.
Black Bear, okay. Uh-oh.
Rip.
Okay, remember I said earlier you need to spell things correctly. There should not be an H there. Uh-oh.
Black Bear is like put together. It's like not with a space.
We should still get something back though.
Yeah.
Okay, let's see what's going on.
Debugging.
So, okay, this is actually a good opportunity to show you guys how to debug. So you can click sources, and you can actually look at the code in here. So you can set breakpoints. So let's set this breakpoint here, and let's set a breakpoint here and here. Okay. All right, so this did get called. We created this URL here. Let's see, so URL looks like /search. Okay, that looks all right. Okay, we're making the request. So let's see, let's continue moving. I don't think I hit the right button. Okay, so we are getting into here. So it looks like ready state change is, oh, I see what I did, okay. Yeah, so this stuff here, I put inside the onReadyStateChange function. You see where the curly bracket ends? And basically, this is where we're actually starting the request. So the state of the request is never going to change if we're only starting the request when the state changes, right? So let's move that outside of there. Okay. Okay, let's remove these. We don't need that anymore. I'm going to go back to the console. Okay, cool. Did everybody see just like a bunch of text get displayed in the console? So you see we have like a result count, and then we have results. And so right now this is coming in as just like, how many of you are familiar with Json? Okay, so basically Json is a JavaScript object notation. So it's like, it's basically a format for how like objects are stored in JavaScript. It's just like a way, it's like a container, a way of like storing data. And this is basically a string that's in that format. But rather than having a string that's in that format, we can actually get an object that we can work with in JavaScript from that string. So that's what we're going to want to do. So the first thing that we'll do here is, let's say, so response, so say response object equals, and you can use this handy function json.parse response. So what that's going to do is give us an object instead of just a string that we're working with. So when we do this now, you see this logs in a totally different way. So it's not just a ton of text, we're actually getting an object. And one of the nice things about these tools here is that you can drill into these objects and see what they look like. So we got result count 50, and then we got results, which is an array, and we can see what each one of these looks like. So basically we're getting back 50 results, and we have attributes like artist name, let's see, like some of the artwork. These are images here. We're getting the name of the collection, which that's the album name, the price. We have the country that it came from, all this information. And so now basically, so we're able to get information back, and you notice the artist is Black Bear. So we're getting information back based off of what we told the server that we wanted. So what we want to do now is use that information and basically put that in a table so that the user can see it now. So let's make another helper function. So let's put a to-do here. So we'll make another function, and let's call this build table from results. And then, so what we're going to do is basically we're going to loop through all of the results. So we can do a for each loop, results.forEach function result. So basically now inside of this is going to go through however many times as the number of results that we have, and we're going to be working with those individual things that look like this. And just to make things look a little bit cleaner, I'm going to use another helper function that I'm going to define in a second. But this table row equals build table row with result. And just use your imagination that this exists. Right now it doesn't, but it will. And then we're going to use, okay, let's build that before we go on. So table row to the table. So one interesting thing that you can do in JavaScript is that you can actually write like HTML just with strings and then like take that string and like stick it into an existing HTML, and then that's something that's now in the HTML. So that's basically what we're going to do here is we're going to programmatically construct these table row, like a table row with the information that we want from this result. So we'll create another function here, build table row with a single result. And so let's take a look here for a second. So you notice we had a table row. So this is for the header, but we had one row in the table. TH stands for table header, and we put all this information here. So we're going to basically just be constructing all of these rows for each of those elements. And instead of using table headers, we're going to use TD, which is table data. Yeah, thank you. So we'll start, so let's make a variable for row, and that will start with this table row. And we're going to want to just incrementally add the HTML to this string as we build it. So we want, I think it might be helpful to keep this open here so we can see what we're actually doing. Sorry, this needs to be a string. Oops. So we had a table row. So the first header item was artist. So we want basically under artist, we want to put the artist for this result. So we'll put a table data here, and let's do results dot. So if you can see here, sorry for switching back and forth so quickly, but artist name. This is what that variable looks like on the row item. So it looks like artist name with capital N, lowercase a. So we're able to work with that here. So artist name, and then we'll need to close that. The next thing was album. So so that I don't keep switching back and forth, you can believe me that you would be able to look through the output that we logged and see what the variables look like. So we'll create another table data. Result dot collection name is how they are storing it. Then we want to add another one. The next thing we want is the name of the track, which is track name. Then we will add the genre. That's stored as primary genre name. And then, so then we want to include a duration and then a link to that specific item in the iTunes store. But in order to, you'll notice here that the track time is given in milliseconds. Track time milliseconds, and at least for me personally, if I'm looking at how long a song is in milliseconds, I feel like that means absolutely nothing to me. So we're gonna convert that in a way that is like more human readable. So we'll create another function that will help us with that. So let's say duration equals, let's have a function milliseconds to minutes and seconds. And we're going to pass in result dot track time milliseconds. So we'll create that function in a second, but for now let's believe that it exists just so we can finish this. So then we're going to add that as a table data item, duration. And then finally, we're going to add the a link. So to add a link, we'll want to use what's called an anchor, or an anchor tag, which it basically allows us to, when you click on it, it's going to open it, and we'll make it so it opens in another tab. That way they don't they don't lose this. They don't have to leave this page. So we'll add another table data, and we can actually put this anchor inside of the table data. So we're going to put an anchor tag, and the way that you specify what the URL is using this href. So I'm going to go slowly here because it's going to look weird because of like single quotes and double quotes and stuff. So I'm going to put one single quote there. I wanted to automatically put 2, but we're just going to put 1. And then we're going to add result dot track view URL plus. So then we're going to have 2 quotes here, and then we're going to end that first quote. So make sure that you have 2 quotes there with just one single quote that's ending the first single quote that was over here. Sorry that this is so like tedious, but we're gonna add this target equals single quote underscore blank end single quote. And what that's gonna do is make it so that it opens in a new tab. That way it could be pretty frustrating if you just like wanna like look at a bunch of stuff and it's just like making you leave the page every time. So that's just like a user experience thing. And then what we're gonna do is close that anchor tag that we created. Put some text here that says open. Or sorry, so close the opening of that anchor tag. Put some text that says open. Then we'll put the end of the anchor tag there, and then we'll put the end of the table data. So yeah, so let's go through that, make sure that looks right. I'll give you guys a second to check yours and make sure that it looks right, because it was a little weird with those quotes and stuff. But we have table data. We have an anchor tag here that ends here. We're putting a link to the track view URL. It's ending here. We're doing target blank so it opens in a new tab. The text for the anchor is open. We're closing it, and then we're closing the table data. I know that was a little confusing. Does anyone have questions about how we did that? All right, cool. And then finally, you see up here, we open this table row. So we also need to close it. Oops. And then we're going to return that entire row. So before we finish this, let's make that little helper function real quick. So we called it millis to minutes and seconds, and that takes in milliseconds. So we're just going to use some of the JavaScript's built-in math functions. So what we want to do is minutes is going to be, so how many milliseconds are in a minute? We have 60,000. Yeah. So math.floor. So we're going to take this milliseconds and divide it by 60,000. And by doing math.floor, we're basically saying don't do any rounding, just like cut it off. Because if there's anything left over, that's going to go into seconds, right? Not minutes. So we don't want to round. Just like cut it straight off. And then now we want to know how many seconds there are. So we will do math.round this time because we'll want to round to the nearest second. And then we're going to do, so how many of you have seen this operator before? Did it ever like confuse you okay, cool. I know for me that was like something that was kind of hard to wrap my mind around at first. But basically just imagine that this is like, it basically just gives you the remainder of this and this. So whatever was left over from here is going to go into seconds, but we're working with milliseconds, so we need to divide by 1,000. And then we want to return a string version of this in like a nice, like pretty format. So we'll do minutes plus, we'll add a colon, and then we'll do plus. So we could just do plus seconds, but it would be nice if we had like, let's say we have like 11 seconds, or we have something that's like 7 seconds. We want to have it like minutes and then like 0.7 instead of just 7. Otherwise, it's just like kind of gonna look weird if like some songs like that doesn't line up in the table. So that's kind of just like a personal thing, but we basically want to see if seconds is less than 10, we'll add a 0. Otherwise, we won't. And then we add seconds. So this is a ternary operator. Basically, think of this as just like a really like nice inline if-else statement. So if this statement is true, so we're going to be adding whatever this thing gives us. So like if this ends up being true, we're going to add a 0. If not, we're not going to add a 0. Then we're going to put in seconds. So cool. So let's go back to what we were doing before. So build table row with the result. We're essentially just constructing a string that is of like a format that HTML will be able to understand. We're converting this to like a nice pretty format. We have our anchor here, and then we're returning row. So let's go back to where we were using this. So now, basically for all of those results that we have, we're going to do this for each of them. And we have this row here that we want to insert at the end of the table. So what we want to do is the same way that we use Jquery to add a click listener to the button, and that we used it to get the text from the that little input field. We can also use it to insert some HTML into something that's already there. So what we want to find is the search results table, and we want to put this in like after the last table row that's in there currently. So in order to do that, we will do, so if you see here in the HTML, conveniently we have an ID for our table, search results table. So actually we don't need a variable for that, we can just do that here. So search dash results table, and then we want to make sure, so this is selecting it, but we want to go one step further and select the last table row. So we'll put table row last here. And then we want to insert this string after this, so dot after table row. So we're building our table row here. We're finding the table, and then at the very end, after the last item that's in there, we're going to be adding our table row that we just created. Does that make sense? So here, we're actually weren't using that yet. So here, once we get a response back, instead of logging it, what we want to do now is build table from results and give it our response object. Is everyone following this part so far? So once that response comes back, this function that we created here is going to get called. We're going to build an object from the response. And then we're going to use this function we made, build table from results with this object that loops through all of the individual things in that in those results, builds a table for it, adds it here. And then we have all our helper functions here that we used. So let's see what happens when we do this. So we'll search for the doors, and we have a problem. For each is not a function. I think I typed that wrong. Let's see, what did I do there?
Got a question.
Huh? Oh yeah.
Don't you need the hashtag for the string where search results is?
I do. Yeah, good call. But I don't think that was what was causing this problem. Oh, okay. Remember the way that this... Here, let's comment this out for now. So our response had results count and results, which was an array. So I was using this whole object here as if it was an array, which it's not. The response object dot results is an array. So instead of just passing this, we want to pass dot results. Actually, we'll do that in here. Does that make sense?
So what did you change there?
Yeah, sorry. So once we parse the response text here, this response object was actually an object that had two properties. One of them was, I think it was count, and the other one was results, which was the array of all the results. So the reason it didn't work was because I was just using that object here, but we want to use the results array. So we weren't able to loop through something that wasn't an array.
Is that why I got like an unexpected JSON error or something like that? Does that have to relate to that? Or?
Log before you do this here, JSON.parse, log what your response looks like.
Okay.
I have a feeling that you might have a typo in the URL or something like that where you're not getting the response back correctly.
Okay.
What are you guys able to go over and help them out so we can keep moving? So if we look now, okay, cool. So we're getting results back now. And you see here we have the name of the artist, the album, the track, the genre. We have our duration looking nice. And these links here, if you click it, it opens in a new tab and takes you right to that song. Is everyone seeing this right now? Hopefully. So there's one other thing that we didn't think about. So what if so these are the kinds of, I intentionally didn't do this because these are the kind of mistakes that would happen like very, very easily. So now let's say I want to search for the Beatles. It looks like nothing happened, right? But if you scroll down, you notice like the search results from the last search are still in the table, which makes sense because we never really actually did anything with that. All we're ever doing is just adding things to the end. So then if we went in and we searched for something else, just gonna show up at the bottom. So we don't want that to happen. So what we want to do is before we actually start building the table, we want to clear all the search results first. So we can actually do that in a few places, but let's do that when we've actually just like first clicked the button. So before we do anything else, we want to clear the table. Not table row. So again, we're going to use Jquery to do that. So we'll get our search table, search results table. So one thing we want to be careful to do too is we don't want to just get rid of everything because we want this header here to stay. So we want to get rid of everything that's after the first thing. So to do that, we'll do this. So table row get, gt 0 dot remove. And this should remove everything except for that very first row. So I'll give everyone a second to get that down. All right. So now, search the doors, comes up, nice. Now if we search for something else, it replaces it, which is good. And then we can open this, see it here, buy the song if you want to. So yeah, so just like a quick recap. So the first thing we did was we waited for the document to be ready, and we added this event listener to the click button so that we can respond to when the user decides they want to search. So we're clearing the table so that we can remove any previous results from a search that came before. We're using Jquery again to find the value that the user was wanting to search for. We're building the URL of our request. We're making the request with this helper that we made, and then looping through all of the items in that and building a row for each one, and then adding that row to our table. So that's pretty much it for the tutorial. Does anyone have any questions about this? Yeah.
What is GT0?
So GT0, let's take a look here. So select all elements at an index greater than the index within the match set. So since we wanted to remove everything except for the very first one, which was the header, yeah, so it removes everything except for that. Yeah. Any other questions? So we generally like to leave these tutorials with stuff that you guys could do on your own afterwards, so that you could, because I think the best way to learn is not necessarily just copying and pasting something that somebody else is doing as they're talking. So this is a good foundation, but there's a lot you can do with this moving forward. So one potential thing that you guys could look at. So let's log this here. So you don't have to write this. I'm just doing this to show you guys. So you notice for each of these, there's a lot of data that we're not using. The price of the song, where is it? The currency, there's price somewhere, I can't see it right now. There's actually URLs for the album art, the images. There's the country that it's from. Here's the price. But basically there's a lot of information that we're not using. So one exercise that you could do on your own is try to extend this table. So you can maybe include a small picture of the album cover, or maybe the price also. So you can sort of go a little bit beyond what we did and actually try it and do it yourself. Another thing that would be interesting to do is, it seems like the internet here is pretty fast, but yeah, it's actually really fast. But you may notice, well, it's a bad example here, but there's a little bit of a delay between when you click go and when the table comes up. When I was doing it at home, there was a lot more of a delay, and there might be for you too. And generally, if this is a real commercial application, if you click go and nothing happens for 2 seconds, it's a bad user experience, because they don't know that you're doing something in the background to take care of the request that they just made. To them, it just looks like the app froze. So one thing you could do is show a loading icon or something like that, or maybe a spinner in the center of the screen. So if you were to do that, basically, right here before you make the request is when you would want to start show a loading icon, and then once the response comes back, you would remove the loading icon. So that's another exercise moving forward. If you wanted to make this a real polished product, that would be a good thing you could do. Another thing is that you can see here, when the response comes back, we're only looking to see that the response is done and that it had a status code of 200. So we're not handling errors. If you gave a query parameter that the server didn't understand, or if the server took too long to respond, you might error out and you might not ever actually have this callback get called. And if something like that happens, you don't want the user to just wait indefinitely. You want to handle errors. So that's another step in making this a polished product, would be to learn how to handle errors. And also let's see. So this ready state. So loading is another state. and it holds partial data. So one thing you could even do is you could, instead of showing a spinner, you could actually show like a progress bar or something like that, and like get updates on the loading state. So there's a lot of stuff that you can do with that. And basically just closing thoughts is that this is just one example. Like the iTunes search API may not be like the most like exciting API to use, but like it was easy to use, and it was like a good demonstration. But definitely don't like limit yourself to that. If you want to like learn more about this, I would say look into the Reddit API. Is like also super easy to use. You don't need authentication. If you want to try to go a little bit more advanced, you could look into like Facebook or like Twitter, where there's you have to use authentication, and there's tons of great tutorials for that. But I'd say a lot of like APIs you're going to be using are going to require you to authenticate and get a token and like use that, and that's like a really good like real world experience would be learning how to do that. So yeah, any questions, any thoughts? If not, then this meeting's over.